What's growing on, gardeners? It's Tuesday, December 12th, and it might be a bitterly cold day here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, but it is already the start of seed starting season for the new gardening year. That's why on today's video, I'm going to prepare for you the ultimate beginner's guide for starting seed.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.
First things first, why should I start my plants from seed? Well, I don't know if you've been to any gardening centers recently, but the cost of transplants have gone through the roof. Sometimes a 6-pack of vegetables can be as much as $5 or $6. Sometimes it's $5 or $6 for one single decent sized plant. Contrast that to a pack of seeds. You can still get a lot of packs of seed out there for about $2 to $3 a pack, and there are at least 50 to 100 seeds in this pack. So I could go to a gardening center and I can buy a 6-pack of cabbage transplants for $5 or $6, or for $2 to $3 I can go out, buy this pack of seed and start 50 to 100 cabbage transplants, and that is with the cost of some kind of potting mix, because that stuff is dirt cheap and easy to make. Next question, which plants do best started from transplant from seed indoors? And there are basically two answers to that question. The first answer is any kind of plant that does not do well being direct sown outdoors from seed in an open air environment. Examples of a plant like that would be onions, leeks, or shallots. Because the seeds are so small and they have to be sown so shallow, they don't do well being grown direct sown in your open garden beds, because they tend to wash away when you get really hard rain and have poor germination rates. So because of that, you're going to wind up with disorganized rows with a lot of gaps in the rows. Those do best started indoors as transplants. The second answer to the question is anytime you want to put plants in the ground that need a big jump start due to climactic conditions. So an example of that in terms of cool season crops would be broccoli and cabbage. Because they need to mature when it is cool out, not yet hot, but not super freezing, you generally want to have larger transplants ready to go as soon as the weather breaks, because if you direct sow them, chances are you will run out of the proper temperatures, and it'll either get too cold for you in the fall and damage the plants, or too hot for you in the spring and the summer and cause them to bolt and go to seed, and you won't get a good harvest. Now, in terms of warm weather plants, things like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and squash also do very well from transplants, so you can give them a big head start indoors. That's because if we wait for the frosts and freezes to stop and we finally start planting things out in our garden directly in April or May, by the time they get large enough to have a harvest, it will already be fall. So you really want to have fairly large transplants ready to go, and the best way to do that is to start your seeds indoors. Now that you understand what the best plants are to start indoors, let me show you how I do it. The first thing that we need to do is we need to gather our seed starting supplies, and I'm going to use the following supplies to start my seeds. I'm going to use a seedling transplant tray with a lid to maintain humidity, but it has an adjustable dome so I can vary the humidity as needed. I'm going to use plant labels, and I'm going to use an oil-based paint pen that you see right here. The oil-based paint pens will last much longer than the water-based permanent markers. The permanent markers will fade quickly, but the oil-based pens will last all season. I'm going to use a chopstick to help add the seeds to the seed trays. It makes life a lot easier. I have obviously the seeds themselves, and I have a seed starting mix. Now you can make your own seed starting mix if you want, using roughly 2 to 3 parts cocoa coir or peat moss to 1 part vermiculite. Add the vermiculite as needed to maintain more moisture, but for this video it was just easier to buy a pre-made product. And I'm also going to use a seedling heat mat and a heat mat thermostat for germination. I will show you how to use them later in the video. The first thing we're going to do is fill our seedling transplant tray with the seed starting mix. Now the seed starting mix is very light and fluffy, so we actually want to use that to our advantage. We are going to fill it up, each of the individual squares, to the top. before we actually compact any of the mix down, because when you compact the mix down, it's going to add a significant amount of room to each of the individual seed starting trays that we will need later to sow our seeds. And you'll see the technique I'm using here. I'm basically just placing the seed starting mix on top, and then I'm running my hands gingerly along the tops of all of the individual seed start trays just to make sure that everything is filled up to the top. And then we're going to scrape off any excess to the side and then recollect it in our potting mix bag because we don't want to throw away that excess soil. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to gently compress the mix down in order to make room for our seeds. Now, all of the different seeds that I'm planting in this video want about 1/4 inch of cover. So when I simply press down this seed starting mix, that's going to give me about 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch of room in each of these individual trays. And that's just what I want, so I can top them lightly with more mix once all of the seeds are sown. Now, it's very important that you do not compress these down firmly. You don't want it to be hard. You want to have just a light amount of firmness, just enough to get everything compressed down, but it is still nice and springy. Now that the mix has been perfectly compressed down, I'm going to add just a tiny bit of water to each of the individual tray cells because I want to pre-moisten the mix. You see, the mix in the very beginning is hydrophobic. It will repel water to a degree. Once you put the seeds in there, you don't want all that water to collect on the top. It won't absorb very well. So I'm just going to apply a light amount of water because the first little bit of water that you put in always takes a while to absorb into the mix. So while I'm letting this water absorb, I'm just going to go about my day, and then once it absorbs in, we'll come back and we will sow our seeds. Okay, after about 30 minutes, the water has absorbed into each of the individual seed cells. Now we need to start placing our plant labels. Now I'm going to plant these by the row, so I basically only need one plant label per row. If you're going to plant your seeds in a more random pattern, you're going to have to figure out a way to label them. You're either going to have to put a plant label per cell, or you can do what I do with my tomatoes and I draw out a diagram and then I list in the paper diagram what each individual seed cell is. Now we are going to begin sowing our seeds, and to do this we're going to use a technique called overseeding. And what that means is we will be planting more than one seed per individual cell. And the reason why we do this is because seeds do not have a 100% germination rate. They only average a germination rate usually of about 80% or so. So if you only place one seed in each individual cell, that means you're going to have a significant number of cells where nothing comes up. And we get around this by placing more than one seed per cell. Now, if you're buying very expensive seed, like I sometimes do with hybrid tomatoes, where 10 to 15 seeds can cost as much as $5, sometimes I will only overseed every other cell because the seed is so expensive that I don't want to pay to put 2 seeds per cell. But in this case, I'm using pretty much all either old varieties or heirloom varieties where the seed is very cheap. So for that reason, in this video, I'm going to place 2 seeds in each individual cell. Now I want to show you why I love using chopsticks in the seed starting process. They are great for getting underneath the lips of these seed packets, and whether the seed packets are brand new or if you place tape on like I do, it lifts off very easily. They're also great for grabbing individual seeds. So I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm going to start off with the green cabbage, and I'm going to place the seeds in my hand like you see it, and then I like to lick the tip of the chopstick, and then that will grab onto the seed, and then I can place 1, 2 in each individual seed tray. Again, let's show you a little bit closer with this close-up. The tip of this chopstick is wet, so the seeds immediately adhere to it. So I like to place them in the corners of each of these individual seed cells, just like that. And this chopstick trick makes things so easy and so precise. you may have noticed that I sprinkled the parsley seeds on top of my soil with my bare hands. That's because parsley has terrible germination rates, and the parsley seed itself, it's really lightweight and hard to deal with. So it's easier to just sprinkle a bunch on top of the potting mix. As for the mustard greens, because the seeds are so small, I overseeded them more, and because we grow them as leafy greens, they can be clustered together, and it's okay if we allow a couple of seeds to germinate in a single seed tray. We don't necessarily have to thin them down to one plant per seed tray. When it comes to the cabbage and the broccoli, they all need to be thinned down to one individual plant per seed cell. So it's very important that we don't overseed them too much, or else we're going to be ripping out a lot of plants and chopping them down. So now that all of our seeds have been placed, we want to bury them all about a 1/4 inch deep. And we pretty much did this perfectly by allowing the compression of the potting mix itself to go down about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. So we're just going to lightly cover them all about halfway, and that will give us the 1/4 inch of cover that we desire, while also not filling it up completely to the top, so it gives us a little bit of a buffer to be able to water everything in. We can't fill these individual seed cells completely up to the top, because if we do that, we're not going to give ourselves any room to add water. So just like before, what we basically want to do is we want to fill all of the individual seed cells with the uncompressed potting mix up to the top, and then lightly run our hands on top of all the seed cells, because then when we lightly compact down the potting mix individually, that is going to basically have us arrive at the exact depth that we want. And now that all of our seeds have been lightly buried in the potting mix, we're once again going to take just a little bit of water, and we're going to wet down each of the individual seed cells. Now, the potting mix underneath has already been primed and should absorb the water fairly quickly, but the mix on top is going to be fairly hydrophobic still. So once again, we're going to have to wait a little while for that water to absorb into each individual seed cell. And it's important that we do this very lightly and drizzle on top. We don't want to disturb the individual seeds, so we're just going to let that absorb into the mix. Okay, the potting soil has absorbed all the water. Now it's time to fire up our seedling heat mat. So what you see right here is my large seedling heat mat in my office, and then I have my thermostat right here, and I have set it to 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, why did I set it to 73 degrees Fahrenheit? Well, brassicas such as broccoli, cabbage, and mustard, they can germinate in soil temperatures as cool as 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but they'll take forever. They can also germinate in temperatures as warm as 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, but you'll probably get spottier germination. The ideal germination temperature for fastest results for brassicas is about 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Similarly, parsley also germinates best at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's very important that when you plant things in a seed tray, if you're going to mix different plants, you have to make sure that they germinate at similar temperatures. You wouldn't want to mix something like cabbage with hot peppers, because hot peppers need much higher soil temperatures to germinate. So I'm going to take this probe for the heat mat thermostat, and I'm going to place it underneath here. So that is going to hold that heat mat thermostat probe. So you can see that is rapidly dropping the temperature because that potting mix is cool. So that is going to slowly warm up as the heat mat warms up, and I'm going to place this dome over top, and that is going to maintain some amount of humidity. I'm also going to open the dome just a little bit to vent it to let some fresh air in, because you don't want an environment where there's no fresh air for your seedlings to germinate, because that can create a rot condition and you can have your seedlings damp off because it can grow mold or fungal diseases. Now, you may be wondering, why am I using this enormous seedling heat mat for that one tray of seedlings? Why aren't I using this much smaller heat mat right here that is the perfect size for that individual tray? Well, that's because my seed starting has only just begun. I just started that one dome full of seedlings as an example for this video. I'm going to start way more. I'm going to start more broccoli, more cabbage, more mustard greens. I'm going to add Brussels sprouts, collard greens, and a whole bunch of other stuff that grows well in the late winter, and I want to get them started now so I can plant them out into my garden in late January to early to mid-February, depending on when they mature. Generally speaking, your seedlings are going to be perfect for transplant sometime around 4 to 8 weeks after germination when they're 3 inches tall. So now we are simply going to keep an eye on these seedlings and make sure that the seed trays do not dry out. So we should check on them every single day and make sure that they are lightly moist. Whatever you do not overwater them. If you keep the potting mix too wet, you will have a high degree of the seedlings developing a fungal disease called damping off disease, and they will fail. They will wither away at the bases and they will die. So it is better to keep your mix slightly dry than too wet. However, we want to make sure that it does not dry out completely, so keep an eye on them. You should expect germination sometime within 7 to 14 days in general. However, sometimes on these seedling heat mats, they will germinate even more quickly. Once you start to see germination, it's very important that you get them underneath strong light, because if they germinate and you leave bottom heat on them, they tend to grow very leggy very quickly. So once you start to see the first few things break ground, it's a good idea to move them into strong sunlight or underneath some kind of intense grow light to prevent your seedlings from getting leggy. It's Sunday, December 17th, and I've had massive success with my germination already. Back here you can see my mustard greens. These germinated in as little as 2 to 3 days. They were starting to break through the soil. So they have to be brought out into intense light or put under grow lights as soon as possible because they're starting to get leggy. The broccoli and the cabbage that you see breaking here, they take a little bit more time, but they're all starting to come up really nicely. So now I'm going to move them out into my sunroom into direct sunlight, and that will easily fix any of these legginess problems. If you ever have a problem with legginess in your seedlings, the key is to get them under direct sunlight, strong sunlight, or strong grow lights as quickly as possible. And then you can also set up a very gentle oscillating fan, because that will move them back and forth, and that will cause them to thicken up their individual stems. And that right there is my complete beginner's guide to starting transplants indoors from seed. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I used in this video or that I use in real life in my garden, they are all linked down below in my Amazon storefront in the video description. So expand that video description and click on the Amazon link to see everything I use in real life. And while you're there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. What's wrong, Dale? Do you want something? Dale, go hit the button. Oh, you want to eat? You want to eat? Oh, we are button training Dale because he knows so many words that we've taught him, but you know what? We're trying to get it so he can communicate and say words to us. And we just started it, and he's already picking it up so well. So in this food right here, we have London broil, Brussels sprouts, carrots, and jasmine rice. Oh, he's been waiting so long for this. Dale wants to. Yeah, buddy. He's doing such a good job. He is such a smart boy. I can't believe how well he's picking up these buttons.